Hello, welcome. My name is Shauna McGrath, and I'm an astrologer here in San Diego. Today, I want to talk to you about Saturn. So, I am recording this live. I'm going to get myself set up so that I can view the chat. And if you can hear me, please leave me a little thumbs up and let me know where you're tuning in from. I'd love to get a sense for where you're at. So the inspiration for this video about Saturn is that we're currently having a Saturn transit now at this moment. And I've been working a lot with Saturn as well, personally, and then in my own client work as well. And so I wanted to sort of flesh out what the deal is with Saturn and how Saturn can show up in your life. And my goal today, we'll see how much I get to. This might be a bit ambitious, but my goal today is to touch on how Saturn manifests when you have it in your birth chart versus transits of Saturn versus synastry, which is basically relationship astrology. So we'll see how far we can get with that. And yes. So my goal is to give you a broad view of how Saturn is expressed in one's life symbolically, and sort of like a more full spectrum, because I think a lot of times when we look up Saturn or we hear about a Saturn transit, it can have sort of like a themes around challenges and things being hard, and sort of like invokes this feeling of like, okay, how do I get through this? When can I just get this over with? And Saturn does have these challenging qualities, but it also helps if we know more about like what is actually going on, the deeper level of this, and that helps make it more manageable. And then it also helps you to get more out of the period, because the way that astrology works is it's not just like, okay, I just have to get through this and then I'm done. It can work that way. And especially transits of Saturn work as sort of a transformational process. So once you're complete with that transit, it's not just that it's done, but it's that you have been changed. The core of who you are can be changed very dramatically. So I hope that makes sense. Hi, it's so great to see you. We have Oregon, Washington. Welcome, welcome. Okay, great. So let's start with overview of Saturn. And if you have, like, I'm also curious, like, what comes to mind when you think of Saturn? I know some of you like to look up your horoscopes or to follow your transits. And some of you are interested in learning how to read your own astrology chart. So feel free to leave a comment in the chat. Like, what do you associate with Saturn, for better or worse? So when I think of Saturn, I think of the symbols that involve weightiness, that involve duration, like long-term things, marathons versus sprints, and effort, putting in the effort, being required to put in effort. Saturn also has these symbols around mentorship and dedication and devotion. So think of dedicating yourself to a mission or to a practice in optional ways, like dedicating yourself to a faith or to a partner. For example, aspects involving Moon and Saturn in synastry, or in a timing chart, like the timing of a wedding. Those are like classic marriage or long-term commitment type of aspects, because the moon is about emotional connection. It's also about home and family, and then Saturn is that long-term commitment. So let's see. Linda says heavy, dark energy, misunderstanding. Yeah. I also see, so like going along with the misunderstanding, I also feel that Saturn has this theme around fear and overwhelm. Fear, overwhelm, and like no options. So overwhelm happens when we feel like we have no power and we have no good options. There is like nowhere to go. There is no exit from the situation. Saturn is also associated with being imprisoned, either literally or feeling that way. Now, that's not to say that if you have a strong Saturn in your chart that you're going to be imprisoned. Like that's very extreme. And when we're looking at the birth chart, we're looking at it as a symbolic or a feeling tone kind of thing. So maybe you've experienced this where you felt trapped in a situation. Linda also says witchcraft, unfortunately. So that's really interesting. I'm curious if you can say more, because I can kind of see where you're going, and that witchcraft is working with the earth elements in order, which is Saturn. Saturn is associated with the physical realm, the physical earth. Witchcraft, from my understanding at least, is that it's working with physical elements in a symbolic way in order to evoke change in your life circumstances. So I can definitely see how that would be something that would be Saturnian in nature. Now, of course, there's a lot of fear and misunderstanding, Saturn, around practices like witchcraft or magic. And so that makes sense to me. Other things are boundaries. Saturn is a symbol of boundaries and containers and containment. And so again, like everything else, this can go in a way that we experience as enjoyable or not enjoyable. So contain that feeling of like no exit and that feeling of restriction, like that is typically unpleasant for us when we feel like we don't have options, we don't have power, we don't have autonomy. Saturn is also a symbol of having power and autonomy and having a feeling of healthy boundaries, of loving boundaries, feelings of healthy containment, and having confidence as well. I think of confidence as like a healthy container because, and when I say confidence, I'm talking about confidence that's like you feel a sense of mastery and a sense of security and safety in the situation or in your work or in your craft or in a certain situation. For example, I'll share with you something that happened to me recently. I was like, oh, this is very Saturn. So I'm working as a marriage and family therapist trainee in what they call the practicum. So this is where I'm providing therapy under supervision. And recently, a person that I work with who has been like a person that's referring clients essentially, said, oh my gosh, like I'm so surprised that this is your first practicum experience because you're so confident. And which kind of surprised me because I don't always feel that way. But she was like, yeah, you're so confident and, you know, you're so good with the clients. And that same week, I had someone else say something to me about my presenting as confident. Again, you know, that's something where I had to contemplate a little bit because I don't always feel confident, even if even if that's what other people see. And I was thinking how when we're confident, that sets people at ease. Because when I'm confident, when I'm sitting with a client, um, I may have my insecurities going on at certain times. And when I'm with the client, I'm with the client. And I'm presenting in a way that is like, hey, like I'm here with you. And I think that what maybe comes off as confident is that I'm confident in our connection. And I'm confident in my ability to be here with you. And this confidence, I think, can be soothing and containing, and it can set people at ease. And so this is Saturn. Saturn, yes, it can be restricting, and it can be a symbol of fear, and it can also be a symbol of safety and security, and having that healthy boundary and containment. Let's see. Okay. A couple other things that I want to touch on, but I'm going to take a sip of tea. So let me know, does this resonate with you? I'm especially curious around the confidence piece, and I want to talk about that more in a moment. Saturn is also a symbol of effort and the rewards that come from effort. So especially if you're having a transit of Saturn. So like, for example, right now we have Mercury that will square Saturn very shortly. So Mercury is in Taurus at this moment when I'm filming this, and Saturn's in Aquarius. So when we have, for example, a Mercury-Saturn square, square is an aspect that symbolizes tension between the two symbols, between Mercury and Saturn. So in this case, to use this as an example, we have a tension between the intellect, between the mind, thought processes, linear thought, also teaching and education, tension between those things and Saturn, which is responsibility, dedication, devotion, limited time. Saturn is very much about how is it that you are going to spend your time, because you only have so much. You only have so much time in a day, in an hour, and in your life. For this reason, Saturn has been associated with disease and death in ancient astrology, because it was associated with the limitation of our life force energy and the limitation of our mortality. So along those lines, Saturn's also a symbol of, or I feel Saturn is a symbol. I don't know that I've read this anywhere, but I think most astrologers would agree that Saturn can be a symbol of hospice care or death work, anything that involves working with people who are elders, or elder care, or care in the later stages of life. So like the physical qualities of aging and the psychological qualities of aging. Coming to terms with your mortality. Coming to terms with the meaning of your life. What's important to you and what's not important. I'm reminded of a lecture that I was listening to. If I can find it, I'll post it in the description after I'm done recording this. But it was by Marianne Woodman, who was a Jungian psychotherapist, and she was talking about age and the symbol of the crone, the symbol of the maternal elder. as she herself was later in life. I think she might have been in her 70s when she was speaking about this. And she spoke about this phenomenon of your physical body in elder ages starts to break down. It starts to become more vulnerable, and you start to require more and more time resting, while at the same time your inner body, your whether we call that spirit or soul or your personality, that divine spark inside of you becomes stronger and becomes more of the focus. So that from her perspective, in elder age, you start to focus less on the physical body and the physical doing of things and more on your own internal experiences, how you make meaning, and that is precious. So this also is very Saturnian, this turning inward, working with the physical limitations, and then turning inward to your own divine wisdom. Saturn is a symbol of wisdom. I also want to talk about projection a bit with Saturn. So projection is a psychological phenomenon where a person sees something in themselves that is in themselves, and they see it in someone else when it may or may not be there. So like a very mundane example is, let's say I'm always late and I have a hard time being on time, which is partially true. I'm getting better at it. But let's say I'm like always late consistently. And then I go to meet a friend for coffee and they're 15 minutes late because, they got in traffic or something like that. And I like flip out or get really angry with them and say like they're always late and they don't respect my time and they don't, they're not responsible and all this and this and that. That is like an example. I hope that makes sense. That's an example of projection where there is something inside of me that I'm doing and I'm sort of like throwing it onto someone else and seeing my stuff in them. Now, the thing with projection is it may or may not be there in the other person. Like in this person, they were late. So like, yes, of course they were late. And I'm so, in this example, I'm so uncomfortable with my own lateness that I get angry at them because I can't get angry at myself. So working with Saturn, an example of projection that I think can happen kind of often because Saturn topics are really uncomfortable for us. Like we're not comfortable with lack of power, with restriction. I know a lot of people who identify as highly sensitive or empathic tend to find it very difficult to claim their power and to claim their desires and their preferences. Again, like this is all Saturn things. As a society in the Western world, we're also very uncomfortable with death and with limitation. So what can happen sometimes, especially if you're having a Saturn transit, is that you may, and again, this is like we all do this to a certain extent. We all have our stuff, right? So it's not like I guess what I want to make sure is it's not something that you shouldn't do. It's something that happens. And when we become aware of it, we can process it so that it feels better. So yeah, like it's not that you should stop projecting immediately. It's that when you become aware of it, it sort of diffuses it so that it it doesn't happen as often, and it's not experienced as painful. So with a Saturn transit, sometimes a person can experience, let's say they have Saturn transiting through their first house. This is a transit that symbolizes taking on more responsibility. Sometimes that involves like a work promotion. Sometimes that involves becoming a caretaker for an aging parent, or becoming a new parent yourself and just having more responsibilities. Sometimes that can even be like getting married or having a new partner or partners, and just more fullness and more responsibility and requirements of you in your life. So if that feels overwhelming, we can sometimes take this stance where it's like, oh, like this isn't fair, and life's not fair, and my boss is just loading all of this stuff on me, or I'm getting assigned projects that so and so should be doing, or it's kind of like externalized, like this increase in responsibility or this hardship is happening to me. Saturn in the first house can also involve like physical body stuff too. So like if there is something that restricts your ability to move through the world physically, that can feel like, my body is like not doing the thing that I want it to do. This isn't fair is kind of like the projection that can happen with Saturn. And so I think it's important to like honor that and to acknowledge that, yeah, like Saturn is a symbol of the places in life where things are really not fair and where there is pain and suffering. And to a certain extent, that is the nature of life, is that there is pain and there is suffering. And I find that one of the keys to working with Saturn is acknowledging that and not trying to make it go away. I know that sounds very counterintuitive and not very fun. But the more that we try to like push away these themes of Saturn, the more it intrudes in our consciousness in an unconscious way. So like this is totally the nature of depth psychology. Depth, like DEPTH, like deep, like the ocean. Depth psychology is oriented around the idea that when we become more conscious of our underlying feelings and motivations and defense systems, that there's like a softening there, and that the suffering of life doesn't entirely go away, and it becomes more digestible. And so I think that's why it's so important to talk about Saturn and to talk about what Saturn is like and how it can feel and what the possibilities are. Through simply talking about it, we are digesting it. Like that's the nature of astrology readings. That's the nature of therapy, is that we're kind of like pulling it apart and relieving some of that pressure. So I do want to say a little bit more, but I wonder how this sits with you. I wonder if you have any thoughts or reflections or curiosities. Feel free to leave those in the chat. Or if there's something that you have been like really feeling with Saturn as we're talking about this, maybe that I've missed, leave a little comment in the chat. I always love hearing what comes up for you. And I haven't talked about synastry yet, so I do want to, let's see, what time are we at? I do want to chat about that just for a hot second. Okay. The one thing I did want to say with Saturn too is Saturn reminds me of the Serenity Prayer. Have you heard this? So I'll say it. I'll say it as to the goddess rather than the god, because that is my orientation. So the Serenity Prayer says, "Goddess, please grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." So I like this because it's really empowering and it's realistic, like very Saturn. So it's like, okay, like what can I change? What can I not? And invoking a sense of serenity or acceptance for the things that you cannot change. This is very Saturn, like those limitations that we no matter how much like willpower or strength, we cannot change certain things. We cannot live forever. We cannot have unlimited hours in the day. And courage to change the things that we can, to find where we do have choice and where we do have power. And this is so crucial because often when we feel overwhelmed, we feel like that no exit, no possibility. Even though it feels like there is no choice, often there are choices. They're simply very inconvenient choices, or they would require like major structural changes. And like this is the true Saturn calling. The true Saturn question is when you're working with this in your birth chart or in your transits or even in synastry, is this a time for being responsible and like how much to keep giving and being like really devoted? And is this a time or is this a time for boundaries and restructuring? Now, this really depends on the situation, and it depends on your temperament and your life and your resources. Saturn is also a symbol of resources. So when we have Saturn in synastry, I find that, so synastry, let me back up a minute. When I say synastry, this is a technique in astrology where you have a couple or a family unit or several people. But a lot of times you're looking at two at a time, where you take their birth charts and you compare them together and sort of lay them one on top of another. And then you look at what aspects are in between each chart, so what connections there are. So for example, let's say that, what do I want to use here? Let's say that someone has a person has Saturn in Scorpio, and then their partner has Moon in Scorpio. So this means that Saturn and the Moon were in the same sign when these people were born. So this is a synastry aspect, Saturn and Moon. What do you think is going to happen? Again, I want to note that like there's a full spectrum of possibility here, and there's a lot that goes into this. So when I'm looking at like a relationship and working with a couple, and they have, so there's going to be lots of different aspects, right? Because we have lots of different planets in our chart. If we're talking about this one, I'm always going to keep in mind that these are two individual people with their own individual birth charts. Like this person with Saturn in Scorpio is not just Saturn. And the Saturn part of them is connecting to the moon part of this other one. So we look at the individual charts together, the context of the individual people, like their life and life circumstances and orientations outside of the chart, their connection, their relationship, their history. And how does that relate to Moon and Saturn? How does that relate to Moon and Saturn, like also dignity-wise and things like this? So when there's a Moon-Saturn aspect in synastry, this can be a highly connecting and like binding and strengthening symbol. And it can feel also a bit heavy. So again, like we're continuing this theme of Saturn as a symbol that is about devotion and long-term affairs, long-term situations and circumstances, as well as a certain sense of heaviness that might sometimes feel like too much. So some ways that this could manifest is that these two people feel very emotionally bonded. They feel very connected, very secure. And the person with the moon in Scorpio may feel that the person with Saturn is, overly restrictive or overly critical. They may feel like the weight of that Saturn. The Saturn person may feel like the moon person is like incredibly like overly emotional or overly emotionally reactive. Those might be some of the problems. The beauty of this is that they may have like a very strong and deep emotional connection and bond. Scorpio is very much about sexuality as well. And so that may be something that is very deeply meaningful, that their sensuality and sexuality is able to manifest in a way that feels deeply meaningful and safe and secure because of the Saturn there. And so for this reason, because Saturn is so much about devotion, longevity, and boundaries and containment, it's really helpful to look at what Saturn is doing in the synastry chart, what Saturn is connected to in your natal chart. So Saturn connected with Mercury, like we have today while I'm filming this, is going to be very different than Saturn connected to Venus or Saturn connected to Mars, and the dignity of which house it is, the dignity of what sign it's in. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If so, leave me a comment and let me know. If you are interested in getting more into astrology and you would like to schedule an astrology reading with me, you can find out more on my website, shaunamcgrath.com. And I'm wishing you a wonderful day and take good care. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.